to the Redskin. Go, Redskin.
What's good, people? Once again, back at you with another episode of Rated R Radio. And this week, we're here to talk about how the Redskins got a 16-13 victory over the Jacksonville Jaguars, and in the process, were able to get their first victory over an AFC opponent this weekend. Now, the Skins, I'm going to tell you, we had lost 4 games in a row coming into this one, and as a long-time Redskin fan, I could tell you that the fan base was rabid looking for a victory here. I will tell you that a certain portion of the fan base has already turned to the we're ready for next year approach, as well as we're actually starting to lose fans as well. And some of those fans are under the age of 30, and I don't really know what to say to them to try to make them come back, except for, you never quite know what's going to happen. I've watched this team over the years catch fire at different times with different players at different positions. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year. All I'm saying is you never quite know what may or may not happen. Now, with that being said, looking back at the Jaguar game, Josh Johnson actually had a really good second half in that game. Now, his first half was kind of mediocre. It seemed like they were trying to just do as little as possible and try to get AP going, which I completely understand. And, it started working a little bit more as the game progressed. I believe AP had 19 carries, something to that nature. That is actually where he needs to be. Now, I know this year that Gruden has tried to limit him with a whole lot of different options at his disposal. Maybe not all the greatest options in the world, and with an offensive line that was not only depleted, perhaps in need of a upgrade already as well at left guard before any of the injuries began. Now, when you take a glance at the stat sheet from this week, which I hate looking at, by the way, but for conversation pieces, let's go ahead and look at it. Johnson had, I believe he was 16 of 25 for 151 yards and a touchdown. His passer rating was 93.9. He also rushed for a career-high 49 yards on 9 attempts for a 5.3 rushing yard average. Now, I'm going to tell you, the team we were playing against had a top 5 defense. So, it's not as if he was going against the league's worst defense. Now, our defense was going against an offense that has been amongst the league's worst. Now, looking more at the Redskins defense, they had 6 sacks on the day, 2 by Kerrigan, 2 by Jonathan Allen. The other ones were kind of cast astray here and there, half sack here, half sack there. Jeremy Sprinkle showed some flashes. I think this kid could eventually be a good, two-way tight end, a good blocker and receiver. I'm not certain how great of a receiver he'll be before it's all said and done, but it looks like we have something there. He did show flashes on that 6-yard touchdown that he caught, and on that drive, I believe he caught another pass. I can't really fully remember at this moment right now. But, looking at that, it seems like that was a good pick. But the turn right before the half was just absurdly horrible. I still cannot believe that we gave them the ball on a return setup and watched them run it back that far with just mere seconds before the half was over. That cannot be acceptable. That's not something that can be acceptable on any standard of the conversation. But anyhow, neither here nor there. This game pretty much hinged on Jamison Crowder's tipped ball catch. It seems like that was the play where everything really just fell in line and the team just started to look like they started clicking. Now, I'm not certain what's going on with Josh Johnson. I'm not certain if this is something that he's going to be able to do consistently. I'm not certain if we found something here or if this is just a diamond in the rough and he fits the situation at the moment. Not certain what we're dealing with here. All I know is that the Redskins had lost 4 in a row and looked horrible in the process. I believe it was something like we'd lost 16 straight games when we were losing at halftime. And Johnson brought us back to win the game. What else can be said about that? Now, for a second, I want to stop and take a broad look at the injury situation because, let me tell you, it does not get any better. It just keeps getting worse. Today, they announced that 2 more players have been added to the injured reserve with Joshua Holsey and Danny Johnson. Now, Johnson had played well this year as far as being a special teams player and being a dime and nickel back. He ended up with a knee situation, and it's unfortunate. Holsey just came back and was added to the active roster just before the game Sunday, which is really unfortunate. And as far as the third player that they added Nick Sundberg, who majorly unfortunate as well. Long snapper for the Redskins. The guy, he gives the Redskins what he's got every year, and it appears like he's got some back issues. Hopefully he can get that right and get back on the field. Sundberg is a fan favorite. He's also a guy that gives everything he can. And the guy that they picked up east, he wasn't too bad. He came out and I think on one of the punts, he almost got our punter killed on one of the punts. But after that, he settled on down and he did what he should have done to begin with. It was his NFL debut, I believe. But looking at these injuries, the team is really just as beat up now as they were the last 4 weeks. But now you add in the non-injury situation with Monte Nicholson being moved to the NFI list, and we won't see him play again this year. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Colt McCoy is still listed as not practicing, but not on the injured reserve. Now, the 3 that we moved to injured reserve today brought it to 20 total on the injured reserve list this year for the Redskins. We had 23 last year. We are the number 1 injured team in the NFL at this moment. Now, what that does at certain positions is it's completely wiped us completely thin. Now, by the looks of the way things are lining up here, we're going to be pretty thin again this weekend. With Nsekhe possibly not going, Jordan Reed possibly not going for a second straight week. Perhaps maybe Bergstrom not going again. He's got that high ankle sprain. I mean, it's a lot of what ifs and maybes in there. What it lines up to be is Washington's going to be thin again. So against the Titans, they're going to be right back against the injury wall once again, as they have been all year. Now, I talked about with the Redskins, the moves the Redskins had to make before Sunday's game to try to get the roster where they needed it. And one of them was to cut running back Kapri Bibbs, who I believe had over 220 yards this season, which obviously is nowhere near what Adrian Peterson had. But when broken down, he had a decent amount per carry. Not to mention, he seemed to be a good third down option. A lot of times, sometimes even better than Chris Thompson. Of course, Thompson's been hurt this year, so he's been a major. I don't want to say the word asset because Bibbs hasn't scored that many touchdowns, but he definitely was a weapon that I thought we were going to try to work into the future. But we cut him, or we waived him. Now, in the process, at the same, maybe a day before that, another Redskin player, Semi Cobbs, who was a 6'3" wide receiver from Indiana that we had signed off the undrafted list, who has been showing out in practice for weeks, was signed off of our practice squad to the New Orleans Saints. So these two moves, while they involve two players that may never be anything in the NFL, are moves that kind of point towards a little bit of situations going on that are more than meet the eye. Something is wrong in this situation. The Kapri Bibbs situation, Gruden explained it by saying he released Bibbs hoping to be able to claim him and put him back on the practice squad, which, by the way, he did not. Green Bay claimed him. And in the process, he said that he thought that Byron Marshall was better on the practice squad and gave them better options out of the backfield. And he based that off of things he had seen in preseason. Now, while that's something that I cannot prove, I have looked at some of the film with Marshall, and I'm not certain I see what he's talking about, but I guess what he's meaning is that the options with Marshall are better. So I'm just going to leave that alone. He's the coach. He sees these guys behind closed doors. His life is to look at their film. So, whatever. To me, it doesn't look like a very good move. But they also signed long snapper Andrew East, tight end Mike Flanagan, and Joshua Holsey to the active roster. And of course, I've already mentioned Holsey went down with a knee injury. Flanagan and East both had their NFL debuts. I didn't really see much from Flanagan. East, as I said before, besides the one punt where he hiked it, it's just there was too much air time. There wasn't enough oomph in the hike, and ended up we didn't get it blocked, but we had our punter got ran into, and he didn't have a very good kick. Now, looking at some other things from moves we've made in correspondence to players being moved to IR, and of course, other situations, but they signed cornerback Harlan Miller, who was a 6th-round pick out of Southeast Louisiana, played 7 games in Arizona the last 2 years. They signed defensive back Alex Carter, running back Russell Hansbrough, and wide receiver Monte Crockett to the practice squad. And they signed Jeremy Reeves, who was a defensive back, to the roster. And let's see here, what else? One or two of the beat guys were talking about how they had worked out safety Dexter McCoyle, who was formerly with San Francisco. Looking at some situations moving forward, it looks like Colt McCoy is actually trying to push to start Week 17. Now, obviously, in my opinion, that would be if the Redskins were to win this weekend. I'm not certain what will happen if the Redskins lose. Maybe they put him on injured reserve and try to start looking towards next year. But at this point right now, the word is McCoy wants to start Week 17. I don't know what exactly that says. Does that say that it wasn't that serious of an injury, or does that say he was rushed back? I really don't know what to think there when it comes to that. Colt has been through a lot of injuries. I just don't know if that's that situation shining through or, really what it is. So the initial Pro Bowl rosters have been announced, and Ryan Kerrigan and Trent Williams have made the Pro Bowl. Now, DJ Swearinger, Tress Way, Josh Norman, Jordan Reed, and Adrian Peterson were all named alternates. With Trent Williams' 7th selection to the Pro Bowl, he tied Darrell Green and Ken Houston, and now only trails Charlie Taylor with 8 and Chris Hamburger with 9 in the history of the Redskins. Now, I don't really know how to look at that in terms of what it exactly means, because when I look at the older guys and want to compare them to nowadays, I always want to look at all pro selections. And Trent doesn't have anywhere near as many as Hamburger. But as far as Pro Bowl goes, this is pretty big. I saw a quote somewhere, and I can't remember where, but it stuck out, and I grabbed it and I put it on my little clipboard that sat there for the last day and a half, and I said, I'm going to have to say something about this when I make the podcast this week. And the quote was, the teams that the Redskins have beaten have a winning percentage of .376 this year, which is the third lowest in the NFL, but ahead of the Vikings. Now, I can't tell you where I pulled that from. I can't remember it. But that's not good. But at the same time, the Redskins cannot pick and choose who they beat, how they beat them, when they beat them, or when they're scheduled. Nor can they pick and choose what penalties are called and are not called. When quarterbacks get hurt and when they don't get hurt. They have no control over these things. Sometimes it's just fate. And I feel like sometimes fans get too caught up in who's to blame and less into the game itself. Sometimes the players just get beat. Sometimes that's just the way it is. And sometimes somebody needs to be fired, just like I've said in the past. Now, how that correlates to the Redskins is all on how you look at it. Moving forward on the topics from this week, Monte Nicholson, who I talked about a little bit before, was moved on to the reserve NFI list this afternoon. Now, while his situation is a different situation than a man on female fight, it's still an act of violence. He's only been charged with a misdemeanor, but it's still a crime. And there is a tape that's floating around from TMZ that shows him striking somebody several times and a knockout punch, what appears to be a knockout punch. Now, I don't know really fully how to approach this without really just point blank saying, guys sometimes get in fights. If there was alcohol involved, I'm not trying to say anything was right or wrong. I'm just trying to say sometimes guys, somebody will say something, somebody will look at somebody's girl, maybe somebody said something about somebody's girl. Maybe they knew each other, maybe they didn't know each other, maybe they just didn't, I don't know, maybe the dude honked the horn the wrong way at him. It seems like it's being written off as a road rage incident that he reacted to. And obviously, we don't know what was said and done. It comes at a bad time in the NFL where right now everything seems to be pointed at domestic violence situations and drug issues. But he's been placed on this list. He's not going to play the rest of the year. I'd say that's the end of Nicholson's year. Upon further review, we'll figure out where he sits with the team later on down the road. Now having HaHa Clinton Dix may be a better situation than we thought before. The next thing I want to talk about was, honestly, after looking at the Pro Bowl roster, I do not know how Tress Way, I know he's a punter, but I do not know how he was not placed onto the Pro Bowl roster. Now, the reason why I say I know he's a punter, a lot of people always say, oh, he's just a punter, why are you arguing for a punter? Well, let me tell you something. I'm going to read you a little bit of his year this year. And this guy has, been balling out. This guy is our MVP. This is like he's having a Mark Mosley-esque season in the midst of this injury-riddled terror fest that we've watched for the last, 14, 15 weeks now. But listen to this. Tress Way has punted 72 times this season with 0, listen to that, 0 touchbacks. 72 punts, 0 touchbacks. He's placed the ball inside the 20 39 times. Not one time has the ball gone into the end zone. 39 out of 72 times with no touchbacks. Now, in the other guy's defense, he's punted it 68 times with 4 touchbacks. So 4 times less with 4 times more touchbacks. And he's placed the ball in the 20 29 times, which is 10 times less than Way. Now, you boil that down into the bottom, the nitty-gritty, and Dixon has 10 fewer punts inside the 20 than Way, and Dixon has 4 more touchbacks. Fewer times inside the 20 and more touchbacks. Now, obviously, it's definitely worth mentioning that Dixon has, I believe it's like a 44.3 yard net punting average, which is ridiculous, by the way. It's completely unreal. Ways is like 41.2, which is borderline Redskin recordish. But we're talking about a 2 or 3 yard difference here, and it's obvious that Way has had the better overall year. Now, I don't want to get into arguing punters, but the guy's been killing it. Respect is due. It's just the way I'm going to look at it. Looking ahead at this week's game, the first thing that comes to my mind is that the Titans are a defensive-minded team that has some injuries. They are in a situations right now where they're not quite as beat up as we are. But they have a couple of guys that may miss this week. As you can see right here, I'm going to show you their injury report. But this game is going to come down to what we can and can't do in the trenches. Now, the offensive line is just beat up, and at some positions they're at their 4th and 5th and 6th, guy in the year. A couple weeks ago, we had 4 tackles and a center playing at the same time, which is crazy. One of the tackles had just been signed like 6 days before, that was playing guard, by the way. And this is a game that we have to find a way to control the time of possession in. We have to find a way to milk the clock with AP in some form of Josh Johnson doing something with the ball. Now, I don't know what they're going to be trying to start the game off and do. All we all know is that after halftime, generally Gruden doesn't make a lot of adjustments. So the Redskins have to be able to control it from the jump of the game, and they have to make Mariota beat us with his arm. It has to be a situation where they make him throw the ball. If they have time on their side and could run it, Derrick Henry is going to run all over us. The man is a freaking man beast. He's a freak of nature. We have to contain him. If there's any way that we can put a helmet on him before he hits the line of scrimmage, we need to do it every single play. Now, obviously, they probably are try to use Mariota in a way to get defenses to try to fall back into zone and to try to watch him because he moves around the pocket and goes outside the pocket and moves the chains that way. And when teams start to move up to try to contain him, then they hand it to Derrick Henry, and he's like 6'4" and is ready to knock somebody's block off. I mean, the guy is humongous. He's like built like a defensive lineman. And the Titans know how to use him. So, and he's been tearing it up the last few weeks. I mean, he really has. But that's what has to happen, though. Washington has to find a way to control the clock. If they can control the clock and make Mariota throw the ball, they can win this game. Now, going into Tennessee is going to be tougher than going into Jacksonville was. So that's definitely against this Redskin team. That is not something that's working in their favor. Not much is at this point. We have our little version of Steamin' Willie Beeman without him, throwing fits in the huddle and telling the coach to go screw himself. That's really the major differences of what we got here. We got a guy that's, he's a Cinderella story. And I don't know how far it's going to go, if it's just going to be a 1 week, kind of thing, or if it's going to stretch into 2 weeks, or what's going to happen here. I know that Philadelphia won, And if we were to somehow pull this victory out, this kind of sets up a Week 17 grudge match. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I know at this point we're really beat up, and this team is struggling in a lot of areas, including their personnel and PR parts of this team. They're struggling right now. They're making some questionable moves. Don't want to get down on players that have only surfed around the practice squad, though. I think that's just looking for something to be upset about, to be quite honest with you. I will keep an eye on the Simi Cobb situation, and I will see how Capri Bibbs does in Green Bay since they grabbed his rights. We'll see how that works out. That's all I got for now. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Rated R Radio, and I'm out. Hail to the Redskins. Peace.